Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from BareMarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your marriage and your sex life. And I'm joined by my husband, Keith.
Hey, everybody.
Who is amazing. And he is my co-author for the book, The Marriage You Want. And we're in the middle of launching it. It comes out on March 11th. It is our new book based on an all-new survey. And can I just say, we just had such amazing conversations in the launch team for The Marriage You Want and just getting feedback from people who are reading it. It's time for health. I just think the church is ready for this.
Yeah.
You know, when we got married back in 1991, I read some really destructive Christian marriage books because that's all that was out there. And it really threw me through a loop. Like, we're still dealing with some of the ramifications, 33 years later, of reading The Act of Marriage by Tim LaHaye. And just Letters to Philip and some of these really awful books that we read back then. And we didn't have Love and Respect. It wasn't
Not
written
yet. That came later. Yeah.
But so many of you have gone through the same thing where you've read these bad books and you're dealing with repercussions. And we don't want that anymore. It's not necessary. None of it was biblical to begin
Well, and
with.
that's the thing is we were told there's no other way to do marriage than this.
Yeah.
And that was the most devastating part of it because now we've realized that is unbiblical.
Yeah.
Like when you actually get back to what the Bible teaches, this is the opposite of that. Yeah. So we were lied to twice over.
Yeah. And so this is actually really good news, guys. This is such good news, is that there is a different way to do marriage that is Jesus-centered, that looks like Jesus, that encourages everybody to look like Jesus and bears really good fruit. Yeah. And that's what we found in the research for The Marriage You Want. And this is the kind of marriage we all long for, where we're truly seen. We see our spouse, we feel totally accepted, we're able to talk about things, we feel close, we feel affectionate. All of that stuff is based on just good principles. Yeah. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So thank you for supporting us. Thank you for pre-ordering The Marriage You Want. Those of you who have, remember that if you send in your pre-order receipt, we have a bonus for you, our alternate concluding chapter. And so please do send in that to pre-order at marriageyouvantbook.com. And thank you to everyone who supports us in our patron group. Our patrons are the ones who are able to give us the financial resources to do a lot of our studies. And you can join for as little as $5 a month and get access to our amazing Facebook group, which we love. And you can also give money through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative of the Bosco Foundation, and that helps fund some of our big projects coming up, like getting our work into Spanish, doing a huge podcast series that we're writing right now, filming some more videos and lots of things so that we can get our work out there and beyond just our little group and our little podcast group, but get it to people who haven't heard it yet. So thank you for being on board. But today, what I want to talk about is something that we've been hinting at and sort of dancing around for the last few weeks of podcasts, which is our findings on mental load and unfairness. And I'm actually really excited about these.
This is something that we found that was really huge. Like the impact of unfairness in this area in the marriage is just, it's unbelievable. So,
So we're going to bring Joanna on to tell you about how huge this is, and then you and I can unpack it. So here is Joanna. All right. I have brought Joanna Sawatsky, our stats person, on for Stats with Joanna, Stats Corner. Here we go. We are going to talk about housework and mental load.
Woohoo!
Yes, because Joanna, when you listen to most marriage teachers or TikTok videos or Instagram, and they talk about the two biggest problems in marriage, what are those two biggest problems that they talk about?
They talk about money and they talk about sex.
Right. That those are the biggest problems. And you know what? There's something that is way bigger.
And we have the numbers to show it. Ha!
Yes, exactly. All right. Let's talk about it. You want to explain?
So, okay. First of all, I would like to say that I remember running these stats while recovering from a stomach bug. And you were texting me all of these ideas. And it made me feel a whole lot better to run these stats. So thank you for being a balm to my soul.
Yes, because this was fun. These
one
ones
was
that
so
she's
fun.
about to tell us. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, we're looking at the marital flourishing scale. It's called the relational flourishing scale. I always think of it as the marital flourishing scale because we were looking at married couples, but that's me saying it wrong. We reallocated the points in the scale. So it was supposed to be from like 0 to 62 or something. And we said, no. We're going to do 0 to 100 because that's way easier. Yeah. It's just, it makes no difference at all for how things were actually scored. It just makes interpreting the stats a little bit more intuitive. So we're going to go with that. And my stats professors all said that that was perfectly legitimate and you could totally do it whenever you want, okay? Thank you. All right. So, with that caveat aside, so we looked at if you have sex a few times a week versus once a month. How
Right,
much does
because
that
this
change?
is what we're told. You need sex every 72 hours. This is vitally important for your marriage. We hear this
Yep.
constantly.
Yep. And it makes a big change. It's a 10.6 point drop, or 10.6% of possible points were lost if you go from sex. What was it? Sorry. Sex a few times a week versus once a month.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
So that is, so sex does matter.
Yeah,
Yep.
of course it does. Makes complete sense.
Yep.
There's a reason that we have a book called The Great Sex Rescue.
Yes. Okay. What about money?
Okay, so money stress in your marriage makes about a 5% change, or a 5-point change. So it's a big deal.
Yep. Yep.
Major thing.
Because remember, like, I know 5 doesn't sound like a lot, but most people on this scale are kind of like between, like, what, 65 and 85, 90. Like it's not like there's a ton of people at the 20.
No.
But, like, it's pretty condensed in that. So yeah.
Yep.
So to
And
drop
a
5
5-point
points
drop
a
is
lot.
statistically significant. And it makes
Yep.
complete sense that money problems would be stressful and it's going to make things harder, right? Of course.
Right.
What about going to church weekly instead of once a month?
Yes, because this is what we're often told, right? Like, going to church every week makes your family stronger, makes your marriage stronger, etc.
Yep. That was also a 5% change.
Okay, so it does. It does make your marriage stronger.
Yep. And again, this is not us saying that sex is not important or good, or that church is not important or good, or that having a stable financial life is not important or good. All of these things are very good things.
Yes.
But we just wanted to lay the groundwork. This is how much the marital flourishing score changed. Changed a lot. It's a significant difference. Cool.
But then,
okay. Now hold on to your hats.
Yes.
When we looked at housework, when your spouse does half of the housework, and if your spouse is doing no housework. So this is comparing if you do about half, or if you do more than 90%. Yeah.
Yep.
That is a 31% drop.
Yeah. So all of these people who are talking about sex and money are the most important things. First of all, they're likely men. Because 31 points is huge. Like, I don't think people understand how huge that is.
Yep.
Because, like, yeah, when we look at all these other issues, yes, it affects it, but not like housework. Housework, mental load, these things are the biggest issues in marriage today, and people are not talking about them. They are in the secular world, but in our Christian books, they're not, unless it's to tell women you need to do it all. So, right, Jimmy Evans in Marriage on the Rock says, hey, men have a need for domestic support. They need women to do all the housework. Right? His name's Hermes. They said the same thing. Yeah, well, guess what? When you do that, her marital satisfaction goes through the floor. Like, it's so bad. And his does too, by the way. Like, if he does all of the housework and she does, none at all, like, his does too. It's just that we found that it was more likely to be women who did that.
Yeah, absolutely right. The stereotype is that women do the vast majority of the housework for a reason. But regardless of who is doing the vast majority, it's associated with lower marital flourishing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when and people do feel the unfairness. So yeah, we also asked, first of all, how much housework do you do? How much does your spouse does? And then does your spouse do their fair share? Right?
Yep. And if you do 60% of the housework or less, about 90% or more of respondents say, yep, my spouse does their fair share.
Yep.
Once you get over that 60% mark, stuff starts dropping like a rock. So we go to, if they're between 61 and 70%, it's about 75% of respondents say that their spouse does their fair share of housework. And by the time we get to 91 to 100% of housework, it's down to 19.4% of respondents say their spouse does their fair share of the housework.
Yeah. And this is whether or not they worked outside the home.
Yep.
So even your stay-at-home spouses, if they are doing 90 to 100% of everything, they're saying, no, my spouse does not do their fair share.
Yeah. And again, there's that small group who say, no, this is reasonable.
I would have been in that small group. Like, when my kids were little and Keith was in his medical residency program, so he was working like over 100 hours a week. I did everything. And I felt that was fair.
Yep.
Because he was exhausted. He was hardly home. And when he was home, I wanted him to play with the kids. Like, the kids needed to see him. He didn't need to be folding laundry. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not like there's always exceptions, right? So we're
Right.
not saying that everyone has to do the same amount, but it's just it has to make sense for your family.
Mm-hmm.
And when it doesn't, people feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they feel like this is totally not fair.
Yep. Yep. And the other thing is that it was completely sustainable for you to do what you did for Keith and for your girls to say, I'm going to do all the housework for the X number of years that
Yeah.
pediatrics residency is in Canada.
Hmm.
But that also wasn't a long-term solution. Now,
Right.
it might have to be if if you have a spouse who is unable to do the housework
Hmm.
um, because of a physical limitation, right? But finding ways to make things feel fair in your marriage as best as you can is great.
Hmm.
Medical residency, just spouses in the military and deployed, those
Yep.
things happen. Obviously, there's not a ton that you can do right in those situations.
Yeah. But on the whole, if there isn't a reason for someone to be doing 100%, but they are doing 100%,
Ugh.
it doesn't work. And
Yep.
so these ideas, well, I work outside the home, so my spouse takes care of the home. Yeah, that doesn't work. Doesn't work.
No, because the home needs a lot more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah. Hmm. And then we asked, this is kind of interesting, is we looked at what happened over time. Things
Hmm.
were unfair. Do you want to explain that one? I called this the unfairness threshold because we saw it in a number of areas. But explain
Hmm.
explain what we did.
Yes, this was definitely your idea. I was very happy to run these stats. And you said, no, 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 I want to see that. I said, okay, sure. And then I ran it and I was like, oh, it's so pretty. So we looked at if a respondent, man or woman,
Hmm.
does at least 75% of the housework.
Okay.
What percentage of them also say that their spouse does their fair share of the housework?
Hmm.
Based on how long have they been married? Dum dum
Yeah.
dum. Okay. So if they've been married less than a year, 72% say, yeah, this is fair. This seems reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm doing 75% or more, but it's okay. I'm
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. At 1 year, 56%, almost
Hmm.
57.
Hmm.
Okay. So we're dropping.
Yeah.
2 to 4 years, we're down to 51.
Hmm.
5 to 9 years, we're at 47. And then it's down to 38% by the time we hit 10 to 14 years.
Yeah,
And
and
then
it
it kind of
stays down
stays
there.
around that level.
Yeah. So this drops like a stone. This is the thing that I really want people to hear me on, okay? Is you can put up with something that's unfair for a period of time, but you can't put up with it indefinitely without
Hmm.
feeling it. And it really impacts marital satisfaction when you
Yep.
feel like your spouse isn't being fair. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Which makes complete sense. Again, like it's fair to acknowledge the reality and say, no, this isn't fair.
And we saw this same phenomenon of like putting up with something that's unfair at the beginning is okay, but it really does drop off in a number of different areas in the book. We talked about sex, for instance, right? If she
Hmm.
never reaches orgasm and you say, hey, how happy are you with your sex life? She's okay in the first year. She's
Hmm.
even okay in the first 5 years, but it drops pretty fast.
Yep.
you know and you can't put up with that forever, or
Hmm.
if one person is mainly the one who takes that first move to repair when there's a problem in the
Yep.
relationship, you can put up with that for a while, but you can't put up with it forever. And this is
Hmm.
the problem, is we need to be a team,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Okay. So then we also looked at what percent, not just of like overall housework do you do and does your spouse do? We
Hmm.
looked at what percentage of different tasks do you do? So like
Hmm.
laundry, dishes,
Yeah.
vacuuming, tidying, that kind of thing. And then we took the women's, where did they stick
Hmm.
their slider, and where did the husbands place their slider? And
Hmm.
then we could look at, okay, what percentage of couples in our survey located themselves in the kind of XY axis that you would get
Yeah, so
looking.
it's actually a really cool chart. It's called a heat map, and it's a
Hmm.
really cool chart, but yeah.
Yes. I was like, we have to do heat maps. And everyone went, I don't know. Do we want to do heat maps? This sounds really weird. I said, no, no, no. They will be so cool. And they are so cool. But essentially what we found is that there's a little bit of a bias toward whoever the respondent was, right?
Hmm.
Understandably. I know every time I fold the laundry, I know that I folded the laundry. If my husband puts the laundry away, I might forget that he did it.
Right.
And so our perception, understandably, is going to be a little bit biased toward ourselves. But that was like a 1 point shift, maybe.
Hmm.
Mostly people know. Like they're saying, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. We do the yard work 50-50 split. Or if there was one spouse who owned yard work, it was probably him. But when it came to pretty much everything else, if somebody owned the task, it was the woman who owned the task. Vacuuming, even stuff that's, just constant and kind of awful, like tidying, just is never ending. Either it's 50-50 or she owns all of it.
Yeah. And that's what we saw over and over again. Either it's 50-50, and about half of couples were like 50-50. Maybe it's not exactly half. It was like 60% or 40%. But it's like, there's a good group of couples that are, we each do our fair share. And then she does it all in the others. And this was true not just with housework. It was true for things like, who makes medical and dental appointments? Do you each make your own? Or does she make them for both of you? And that's how it was. There was very, very, very few couples where he made the appointments for both of them. It was either, it was like in half of them, she does it for both, in half, they each make their own. Same with kin keeping. So who keeps track of the parents' anniversaries, birthdays, anniversary parties, the sibling stuff? Who keeps track of that? And either she does it for both of them, or they each do their own family.
Yep.
In very few families does he do it for both of them. So it's like either she is doing absolutely everything, or they're doing it together. And we see this over and over and over again.
100%.
Yeah. And when she's doing it for both of you, it doesn't work well. Like teamwork works so much better. And one of my favorite charts that we put in the book is chart number 5.5, which is how does feeling like your spouse does their fair share of housework affect your marriage and sex life? And I really wanted that sex life part in there, as we want to tell, men especially, like the pastors who are teaching that women are supposed to do all the housework. Here's what happens to your sex life when she does.
Yep. And I would just like to say that the sex life increase of saying that your spouse does their fair share of housework, it does not matter how you look at it. Like, it can be the husband saying that she does her fair share of housework, and it can be the wife saying that he does his fair share of housework. And then you can look at either how he rates his sex life or how she rates her sex life. So that's 4 different ways. All 4 different ways. It's statistically significant on the change in how satisfied you are with your sex life broadly. Yeah. So just do your fair share of housework.
Yeah, it really does matter. It matters so much more than sex. Like, if people are wondering why your sex life is in the toilet, it's because of this, because this is more important in terms of marital satisfaction overall.
Yeah. It's probably like or there's something going wrong with somebody's not orgasming. There's something, there's an issue with regarding the sex. Or it's, wait, let's deal with the basic relationship things. Because that will help in all areas.
Everything else.
This is a rising tide lifts all boats situation.
Yes. So housework matters, people. It matters more than sex and money. Yep. Be a team.
Yep. It's boring, but you do have to do it. This is adulting.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm glad we started this podcast with data.
Yes.
Right? Because when you start talking about mental load, emotional labor, all that kind of unfairness threshold, all this kind of stuff, a lot of people get their backs up immediately.
Yes.
And there's a lot of stuff out there about how you're man bashing because you're talking about how things are unfair in the household. And it's like, when I hear people talk about that's man bashing to talk about making things fair, it's kind of like that quote, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Yes. Like, when things have been really easy and you're asked to, hey, how about you step up and give up some of your easiness, it feels like you're being asked to do something really unfair. But it's like, no, you're just correcting an imbalance.
Yeah, because we're not asked, like, no one's saying that it has to be 50-50 no matter who's doing what. Like you talked about with Joanne a little bit. And in our personal experience, when I was working as a resident and I had 100-hour work weeks, then I didn't do any housework. I didn't because there was no time. And that's how we divided things, because that was fair.
But now that I'm working more than you, you're doing more housework than I am.
Because we shift to do what's fair and what the family needs, right? Because that's the thing. And I think most men would give lip service to the idea that it should be fair. But the reality is the stats show that in relationships where both people are working outside the home, women do more housework than men.
Yeah.
That is reality. That's not man bashing. That's reality. And the really thing that I found interesting when we were doing the reviews of the literature out there, the finding that I found the most disturbing was that they tracked over time. That disparity doesn't decrease. That disparity increases.
Yeah.
So over the length of marriage, on average, women do more housework and men do more resting.
Yeah.
When they've done time studies of who's doing what,
Yeah.
that's what we see happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's a natural way to fall.
And that same study also found that women's marital satisfaction dips substantially more than men's does, and that's what they attribute it to, is this unfairness threshold that we were talking about.
Because what we hear in Christian circles is women are not in love with their husbands anymore, so what's wrong with you women? But it's like, let's put ourselves in a woman's shoes. Let's imagine you have a situation where I'm going to put you in a relationship where it's going to be unfair to you, and it's going to get progressively more unfair over the years.
Yeah.
Are you going to get resentful? As a guy? Yeah, of course you are, because we're human beings and we don't like things that are unfair to us. That's just natural. So let's fix the problem. Let's not blame women for reacting naturally to the situation.
And unfortunately, what's happened in Christian circles is that we have been taught that it's actually a man's need to have his wife do the housework. That this is the woman's job. And not just that this is the woman's job, but that God actually put a need into a husband to have his wife look after the home and do all of this stuff.
This is all the time. And so then it's so easy for us as men to not even realize we're slipping into assuming this is her job.
Yeah.
And that it's natural that I wouldn't do it, and it's natural that she would.
Yeah.
One of the big people who preaches this, we talked about it a few podcasts ago, is Jimmy Evans.
Right.
He talks about the fundamental needs of a man.
And can I just interject and say, I was so, Jimmy Evans preached such terrible things about hierarchy.
Right.
And I was just so disturbed by it. He platformed Mark Driscoll even after Mark Driscoll was so awful and called women penis homes and destroyed Mars Hill Church and left so many Christians. He was so spiritually abusive. And he kept him on. Okay, this was a man who has such bad discernment and is hurting people. And I felt like there was nothing I could do. And then our podcast on Jimmy Evans came out at the same time as the Daystar scandal broke.
Where he was being
it was like God
abusive.
Arranged that, because we could have run the podcast back in July, but for some reason I kept no, it's not the right time yet. And then he ran it the very week that the audio dropped of him being spiritually abusive. And then within 3 weeks he had resigned from XO Marriage. And I just feel like finally somebody had to resign. Finally. Yeah. But
because forget the fact that a man needs domestic support from his wife is a stupid need.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a stupid thing to say. But he actually says it's a God-given thing.
Yeah.
We have a clip. Can we play the clip that shows
let's
that?
just listen to the kind of language that is being used. So as soon as you say that this is a God-given need that men have, this is the message that we are now given.
If you shame me for what is a God-given need in my life and refuse to meet that need, that's going to be a problem. Because I can't change it. It's wired within me. It's the way that God made me. And so sometimes, I really thought that something was wrong with Karen. She really thought that something was wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with either one of us. We were the way that God made us. You say, well, why does God do that? Because only servants can succeed in marriage. Selfish people, it's hell on you.
Yeah, and so this is the thing. It's the woman's job to look after the house. It's not his job. So therefore, even when I'm laid off work and you're still working at your job, it's not my job to clean the house.
Right.
No guy says, I'm going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is you fall into these patterns because the things you've internalized about what you believe is right and wrong influence how you act on a day-by-day basis. So we as men need to be taking the initiative to say, hey, am I living in a state of privilege, unaware of the fact that I'm living out privilege and don't even recognize it?
Yeah, because like I said, we have grown up in these churches, so many of us, which have taught this.
Yep.
And so if you're a guy and you're like, yeah, but my whole life I was taught that that's the woman's job, that is hard to break from.
Yeah.
It
Even
is.
if you want to break it, you slip into habits, right?
And Jimmy Evans is not the only one who said this. Like, so many people have said this. Willard Harley made it one of his needs in the book, His Needs, Her Needs. So many people talk about how...
I just love
and
it.
they always frame it as a nice thing. Like, isn't it wonderful how God made women to want to be nurturers, to want to be carers, to want to be caregivers? Isn't this wonderful how God made women to just gravitate towards the home? And it's women who give the home the feeling of comfort and peace. It's women who do... And they sound like they're praising women when they do this. But what they're really doing is excusing men from having to take a role in looking after something, which takes an enormous amount of energy and time.
Yeah.
Right? Here's something Doug Wilson said. Can I read you this one?
Oh my gosh, yeah. He's the pinnacle of this kind of nonsense.
And I didn't used to quote Doug Wilson because I considered him fringe, but he's just becoming so influential right now. Here's what Doug Wilson says. Godly women want to feed their men. Godly women are designed to make the sandwiches. This is not an absolute law like the one about making babies, and there are times when a man fends for himself and makes quite a decent sandwich. But in the general scheme of things, the Apostle Paul wants the women to make the sandwiches.
Yeah.
And he takes that from Titus 2:5, where Paul is telling women to be busy at home. That is not the point of Titus 2:5.
Well,
but
and
whatever.
Forget, like, the fact is that online, make me a sandwich is a meme for misogyny.
Yes.
Like, hateful things. It's like, shut up, woman, and make me a sandwich.
Yeah.
Is a meme which denigrates women.
Yeah.
And he's using that to make his point. Mm-hmm. Like, he's leaning into it.
Yeah. And if any of you are interested in learning more about Doug Wilson, there's an amazing podcast series out called The Sons of Patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And they actually featured me on 2 of them a couple of weeks ago. So go check those out. The ones about marriage, second in rank in marriage, I'm featured on them. So you can listen to the Sons of Patriarchy podcast and spread it around, because we do have to break this hold that Doug Wilson has on the church. But what I want to talk about now is, I know that there's a lot of women who are having their husbands listen to this podcast because they want their husbands to understand what mental load feels like.
Yeah. And I think a lot of guys want to understand too.
Yeah, and what women are talking about. So I want to give an example. And we gave this example in The Marriage You Want. We also gave it in, I think it was The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. We've given it in a couple of books now. But I want you to picture a couple, Sandra and Mark. All right? And they have 3 kids. 3 kids. 2 of them are in school. All right? Like, let's say they're 10
2
and 8.
2 kids and a baby.
2 kids and a baby, okay? Yeah. And Mark says, hey, Sandra, you know what? You are so exhausted. You do so much for us. I want you to just take Saturday morning to yourself. Mm-hmm. You go out, do whatever you want. I'm going to hold down the fort here. And Sandra thinks, oh my gosh, Mark, that is amazing. Thank you so much. So she goes to work out. Maybe she goes to a coffee shop, reads a book, whatever she does. She has an amazing time. And she comes back home. Now, here's the problem. When she left that morning, Sandra put a load of laundry in the dryer. Right. And she yelled at Mark as she was leaving the house, Mark, don't forget to get the clothes when the dryer buzzes.
Right.
Okay?
As the person who does the laundry in this house,
yes,
if you take your clothes out of the dryer right away,
yes,
you avoid ironing.
Yeah,
it's so awesome.
You don't have to iron. If you leave the clothes in, you have to iron. And so it's actually a pretty big deal. It makes work for the other person, for yourself, if you don't take the clothes out right away. You know, so she did that. So she comes home and she notices that all the breakfast dishes are on the sink.
You made pancakes.
Yeah, the kids are absolutely they had a great time.
Happy.
Yeah, they had a great time. They played with Dad all morning. They had pancakes. They had a wonderful morning, and Dad is beaming, and the kids are beaming, and Dad is so happy that Sandra had this good morning. But as she gets there, she realizes lunch isn't made yet, but also they have a birthday party to go to at 2:00, and the birthday present is still on the counter. It hasn't been wrapped, and she's like, that's okay, I'll just go wrap it. So she takes it, she goes to wrap it, and as she walks into the living room, she passes by the science project that is due for the science fair on Monday for her son, and nothing has been done.
It's clear that hasn't done any work.
And they were talking about it at dinner last night, and there's a big family calendar with a big star on it, and she starts to think, well, I wonder if little Susie practiced piano, because she has a recital coming up and she's supposed to practice for half an hour a day. Did Mark make them practice piano? Because every Saturday morning, before they do anything fun, Sandra makes sure that the homework is done and the piano is practiced so that they can have a fun day the rest of the day. And so she asks, has the piano practiced? No, it hasn't. So Sandra's like, okay, go practice piano. But meanwhile, they have to leave soon, and she's running around like a chicken with her head cut off, and Mark is thinking, what are you doing? Why are you so upset? You need to calm down. Yeah. And then he throws out, oh, by the way, my sister called and is wondering what we're going to do for my parents' anniversary next month. And Sandra turns to Mark And she goes, well, they're your parents. And this is what mental load feels like.
And then finally, she says, "Did you at least put the clothes in the out of the take the clothes out of the dryer?" And then he thinks that's what makes her explode.
Yeah,
because she explodes at that point, right?
Yeah,
and he thinks that's well, you got so mad at me for forgetting to take the clothes out of the dryer. What's wrong? But the issue is that she couldn't leave him because he didn't own all those tasks. Like running the house is more than just holding the fort down till the real person who's running the house comes back.
Yeah.
Right? Like she wanted a man who could step in and do all the things that needed to get done, who already knew what needed to get done and get it done, right?
Yeah. And it's not like they didn't know that there was a piano recital coming up. It's not like he didn't know that there was a science project due. You know, it's not like he didn't know that they were going to a birthday party this afternoon.
Yeah.
Right?
But he was clueless because he had, in their marriage, he had the option of being clueless. And so he was used to being clueless.
Right.
And that's not a good partner.
Yeah. And this is the problem, is that people think, oh, isn't it amazing how she can keep track of all of those things in her head?
Yes.
But the reason that she can keep track of all those things...
Because this is what happens, is we say, the reason I can't do it as a man is because I'm not a multitasker.
Right.
I can do one thing and give me the one thing, because you women...
Yeah.
You can multitask. So that's why you're the ones who have the domestic support job that God gave you.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that, but you do.
Yeah. And I got into an argument about with Rebecca about this a couple of years ago on for the podcast, as we were preparing a podcast about mental load. I think it was the first one that we ever did. So this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I said to her, well, yeah, but women are better multitaskers. And she looked at me and she says, Mom, you know that's a myth, right? I said, no, it's not. And she goes, oh, it totally is. And I said,
even you bought it. Even you bought it.
And then I actually made her show me the studies, and she pulled up the studies, and they have done several experiments on this where they put both men and women in situations where nobody has any experience.
Yeah.
So nobody has a leg up. Nobody is used to doing any of this. And they see who can do it better. And both men and women are equally bad at multitasking.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So why are women so much better?
The women are better at multitasking in the home because they have practice.
Yes.
Because they haven't had a choice.
Yeah.
Right? So if you know that the science fair project is due, and you know that the piano recital is coming, and you know that you have to go to a birthday party, you've got to manage all of these things in your head at the same time, and it is exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is exhausting.
And that's the thing, is the reality is that society expects women to perform in this way, and it doesn't expect men to perform in this way.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Right.
And so then, therefore, women are basically thrown into the deep end, and they learn to multitask because they have to.
Yeah.
But the good news is if men choose to take that on, they can learn the skills too.
Yeah.
But it's a hard skill to learn, and it does take a lot of work. Yeah. So a lot of men opt not to, because why would I if I can get away with not? Because, and it's not man bashing, because women would get away with it too if they could.
Oh yeah, totally. But the Friday night, when they were at dinner, they were talking about the science fair.
Right, yeah.
They were talking about the piano. It's not that he didn't know. It's just that he had the privilege of knowing, I don't need to carry this. And so while I am cognitively aware that there is a science fair coming up, while I'm cognitively aware that there's a piano recital, he's like, there's nothing I actually have to do about it.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to make this register to me.
Yeah.
And so all of that responsibility is falling on her. So she is feeling the weight of that all the time. And that's why she has all these things in her head. Like, Mark Gungor does that whole comedy routine about how men have a nothing box. Whereas women, everything is connected to everything else.
Yeah, yeah.
That is not biological.
Yeah, yeah.
It is. We do not have, men and women do not have some sort of different brains where men have a nothing place and women, everything is connected. The difference is women are always thinking about all of these things that are on their plate in a way that men aren't, because women are responsible for more things. Mm-hmm.
How many, I've seen that a lot too, women saying, like, I wish I had a nothing box.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that women hate the nothing box. Women would love to have a nothing box. It's just not, they're just not able to, because it's a privilege they're not afforded.
Right.
Generally.
And of course, a lot of men have a lot of stress at work. Yeah. And I'm not
I don't have a nothing box anymore. Yeah. I had a nothing box when I was younger and a little bit more sexist, but I don't have a nothing box anymore.
Yeah. Because, we're thinking about, okay, I have the afternoon off, but does someone need me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, does Rebecca need me to help with the kids? Before I decide what to do, I need to figure out who might need me and what my other responsibilities are. You know?
And if I'm going to have some downtime, I have to make sure you're okay too.
Yeah.
Because that's what a team is, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm taking downtime constantly and you're not, then our team is not doing well. Right. So we need to be aware of that. So.
No, but when you were working, when you were a pediatrician, more. I mean, you still are, but when you were
when
on
I
call,
was
when you were
crazy
doing the
busy hours,
and when you were doing more of the critical care, like that is stressful. Yeah. So I'm not trying to say that men don't have stress; they do. But the difference with work stress versus home stress is home stress, you can never, ever, ever get away from it. Mm-hmm. And even though work stress may be in the back of your mind, you can leave to a certain extent. And studies have found repeatedly that the people who bear the most stress are actually stay-at-home mothers. Mm-hmm. That women's stress levels are way higher than men's. Mm-hmm. And it's largely because of this stuff, because it's never ending.
Right.
It is just never ending, and it's all consuming.
Yeah, and again, it's not a male-female thing. It's a fairness thing. Because in our studies, too, we found there were some men who were doing more of the mental work and more of the emotional labor and that sort of stuff in their relationships, and they also resented it too.
They were suffering too.
Because it's just unfair. It's just that statistically it happens more that the wife is carrying more of it than the man, typically. Yeah.
And so this is what we're talking about, is like, this is exhausting stuff, and you cannot keep up the unfairness forever and expect to have a happy marriage.
The dam's going to break at some point.
You just can't. An Australian study that we've quoted a lot on this podcast found that when you have this kind of imbalance where she is doing the majority of the mental load, he starts to be seen as a dependent.
Right.
So she starts to see him kind of as one of the kids.
Yeah, and that's the joke all the time, right?
Right.
Talk about their if you've got 3 kids, he's the 4th kid. That's sort of a thing,
because he needs her to do his laundry. He needs her to clean up after him. Yep. He needs her to tell him what his schedule is, because she knows what his schedule. He needs him to look. He needs him to do all. He needs her to do all of these things, and it's like, okay, well then you're not really functioning as an adult.
Yeah.
You're not really my partner, you're my dependent. And you know the thing about dependents? You don't have sex with them. Right? Nobody is attracted to a dependent, okay?
Yeah.
And this is one of the big reasons why libido falls. And this kills me. Like, I find this so ironic that so many marriage books talk ad infinitum to women about how men have these huge sex drives. Don't you dare deprive them of sex. Don't you understand how much you need sex?
Yeah.
And they don't even look at mental load and housework, which actually has such a greater effect on marital satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, I've even seen Christian books say things like, women, we know it's really tiring for you, to work all day. So make sure you take some time for yourself in the evening to be ready for your husband that night.
Oh, yeah.
It's like... Yeah. Dude, like, talk to the guys. Like, pick up the dish towel. Like, do something to help, right?
Yeah,
like, if she's tired and that's why she doesn't want to have sex, then, like, make her less tired.
Yes.
Like, it's just, I don't understand why they don't see that. Because it's the books that preach the most that the men are supposed to be in charge of the relationship, and that the women are supposed to look after the house. That are the ones who also end up being the dependents who don't know how the house runs and need to have lists made for them.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of a leader needs to have lists made for him and be cleaned up after all the time? Yeah. That's not a leader.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we should get rid of the leadership thing like we said a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's not consistent. You're not being consistent with your own beliefs.
Yeah. I was talking to a woman recently about our book. She was interviewing me, and she comes from a more conservative background, so she believes more in gender roles, and she and her husband live through these. And I was explaining all the stuff about mental load, and she was like, "No, really?" And I explained the multitasking myth, and she was like, "Really?" And she wasn't sure she was buying it, but I think I talked her into it.
You didn't buy it at first either.
No, I know. But at the end of our conversation, she said to me, "Let me give you an example, because I think I see what you're saying." And they had a small business, and they were trying to save some money. And so the husband had invited some people to stay with them for a couple of days during a big business conference that was going on, right? Because this would save their business some money. And she's like, "I understand, but now I have to meal prep and meal plan and clean to have all these people over." And it just never occurred to him. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah. Yeah, because the husband wasn't being deliberately mean to the wife, right? Yeah. He wasn't thinking, "Oh, it's okay, she can do all the work." Yeah. The work didn't even cross his mind. Register to him. Yeah. Like, it didn't even register that, oh, by planning this, I am signing my wife up for a lot more work, right? Yeah. Because since that work is done without him having to think about it, it doesn't register in his decision-making mind, right? Because it's like, that's why they call it the invisible work, because it just gets done no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, whether he's doing it or not, somehow the meal planning gets done. He doesn't have to think about it. The laundry gets done. He doesn't have to think about it. And so this stuff just doesn't register to him.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what mental load is. And that's what we need to fix. So let's talk about how you fix it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you actually deal with this. Yeah. And one of the best books on this that changed our lives was the book Fair Play by Eve Rodsky.
Yeah, well, it didn't actually change what we were doing. Like, the whole way you heard about it was your cousin saying...
Yes.
Like, we were talking, and then your cousin said, oh, you're doing something that I read about in a book.
Yeah, you know? Yeah, we were actually already doing it, but it put words to it, and I was able to start teaching on this, because like, oh, this is actually really important, and this would change things for so many couples. Yeah. Because this is actually the most important thing if you want to have a good marriage for years. Yeah. And to get over unfairness.
Because people don't understand what mental load is, and she talks about it very specifically, and she explains how to beat it.
Yeah, and so this is the one of the biggest things she talks about is own different tasks. Yeah. And you have to own the whole task, okay? So what she says is that every task that we do has 3 parts. Has conception, planning, and execution. Yeah. So let's take grocery shopping as an example. Sure. Conception is like keeping track of what pantry items we have that we're running low on. It is just kind of keeping track of what's in the freezer that we need to use. So I know what food we have in the house, right? Yeah. Planning is
what food we need typically in a typical week.
Right. Planning is okay. What do we actually need to eat this week? So what do we have to buy to add to what we have? And then execution is getting in the car, driving to the grocery store, and getting the food and coming home. And when people say, oh, who does the grocery shopping? Right. They think what you're asking is, oh, who gets in the car, drives to the grocery store, and puts the food in the cart, right? They don't think it's the person who says, oh, well, we're running low on rice. We better add that to the list. Or I'm keeping track. Oh, I made cookies last night. That was the end of our chocolate chips. So if I'm going to make cookies again, I'm going to need more chocolate chips.
And a lot of problems with mental load in marriage are because people don't recognize those 3 parts of every task. Yeah. And a lot of times we only see the executive part of the task, the execution part of the task. Yeah. And so what happens is we divide up the execution parts 50-50, and then we both feel like we're doing half the work, but one of us feels exhausted because they're doing all the C and P of all the tasks. Yes. But we don't have words to explain why I feel like I'm doing more than my fair share, because we're both doing half of the tasks, supposedly, right? Right.
Like, let's say that I said to you, hey, can you drive little Johnny to hockey practice tonight? Right. What do you think I'm asking you to do?
You know, I, having read Eve Rodsky's book, know what that means. But a typical person who doesn't understand mental load thinks that means put Johnny in the car, drive to the rink. Yes. Drive Johnny home after it's done. Yeah. That's the job.
And you probably think it means putting the hockey bag in the car too, but that would be about it, right?
Probably.
So let's say that you do that. You get the hockey bag and you start taking Johnny out. And meanwhile, your wife is yelling, hold on a sec, do you have the fundraising stuff? Because Grandpa put his check somewhere. I know I saw it on the counter. You got to bring the check in. Oh, yeah. And last week, don't forget we have the Tupperware container you got to pick up, because last week I brought in snack and we never got the Tupperware container back, and it's one of my favorite ones.
And Jared's jersey, he borrowed Jared's jersey last week and we got to get back to her. I cleaned it. I think it's up in the laundry.
Yeah. And so she's shouting all of this stuff and she sounds like a mad woman.
Yeah. And he's like, I just said I'd drive him to work. Like, what's all this other stuff I'm supposed to do now? All of a sudden.
Yeah. Like, why are you mad at me? Yeah. All of a sudden. And that's the problem, is that when one person is taking on all of that, keeping track of all the details, it's really hard for the other person to just come in and do it.
Yeah. Or they come in and do it and they do just the execution. Yeah. And they want to feel like they did the whole task. Yeah. And it's not fair.
No, and she really does look like a crazy person, because she's always yelling out these things and she's always freaking out at me. And
that's the stereotype that happens, is a lot of times in these kind of marriages, dad's the fun parent and mom's the killjoy. Yeah. Right? Because dad has this great idea that we're going to do something, but mom's immediately thinking of all the things that are going into that have to happen, and that most of it's going to fall on her shoulders.
So dad says, let's go to the beach, and he thinks we mean let's pack a lunch and grab swimsuits, and she's realizing everything else that goes into it. Yeah.
So what Eve Rodsky says is, if you want to own a task, own the whole task. So from the conception to the planning to the execution, and then you actually know what goes into it. Then you actually appreciate a lot more what's happening. And guys, because again, there are some marriages where he does more of the mental load than she does, but most of the time it's the other way around. So guys, if you really want to be a partner to your wife, start taking on those conception and planning sides, the tasks, and taking on those mental loads. It is such a huge weight.
Yeah, because imagine that he drives Johnny to hockey every week. But that's all he does. Then all week she has to think, okay, I need to tell him to ask Nathan's mom about carpooling next week, or I need to tell him to ask Nathan's mom if we can buy his older brother's,
whatever, all that stuff,
equipment or whatever, right? Yeah. So she's still thinking about all these things she needs to tell him to do, and she's still carrying it all.
Yeah.
Right? But if he realizes that if I take on hockey, I also need to remember when it's my turn to bring the snack. I also need to remember to look after all of the equipment and plan for next year's equipment. I also need to remember to register him. Yeah. I'm in charge of carpooling, of arranging carpooling. I'm in charge of all of this. So then she doesn't have to keep track of it, and she doesn't have to remind me. And that's such a huge weight off her shoulders. Yeah. And that's what we mean by owning the whole task. It's like
and there's a lot of tasks that go into running a family, and there are some tasks where naturally the husband takes on the whole task from the beginning, and she doesn't know anything about it either. Like it's not that like men don't have the capacity to do a whole task. Yeah. It's just that we gravitate to thinking certain tasks are woman tasks. Yeah. And keeping track of everybody's schedule and knowing who's supposed to be where. We just naturally get into these patterns where we assume she's going to know that, and that as a husband, my job is just to ask for the list and go pick up the groceries. Yeah. And I've done my share, and that's not being a partner. Right. If you want to be a partner, you need to understand everything that's involved, and you need to be discussing these things, because if one of you's bearing more of the load, then you need to offload that. And again, it's not a man-woman thing. It's just a fair thing. Yeah. This is our marriage. We need to divide up the tasks that need to be done in our marriage in a way that is fair.
Because we're a team.
And
often what happens is husbands tend to gravitate to tasks that can be done on their own schedule.
Yeah, that's another thing Rotsky talks about.
Yeah, so mowing the lawn, doing the finances. There's nothing that says this has to be done at 4 p.m. on a Monday or something, for instance, right? Yeah. But there are tasks. They're
discretionary in a sense.
Yeah, but there are tasks that actually do need to be done every day at a certain time, right? Making meals, getting homework done.
Rotsky calls those daily grinds.
Yeah.
That's stuff that grinds all of us down, right?
Yeah, and so make sure that you're doing some of those tasks that are time consuming and happen at a certain time every day, that you can't just do at your leisure. Because that's what makes people feel like I am a slave to the calendar, because you are. So if you're going to take on homework, for instance, it means that you know your kids' teachers' names. You're keeping track of when different things are due. You're keeping track of have they done their homework. You're keeping track of making sure the homework is in the backpack. If there's a science fair coming up, you're the one who's going to go buy the Bristol board with your kids and the markers and the tape or whatever they need. So you're doing the entire thing. And what that means is that your spouse doesn't have to think about it. So that your spouse can think about the tasks that they are doing. And it honestly is such a weight off your shoulders.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, early in our marriage, I had a lot of this kind of, this was a real mentality for me. I grew up in a family where my dad didn't do any housework at all. My mom did everything. And I just naturally had that underlying assumption. I never would have verbalized it. I would have said the opposite if you asked me. But unconsciously, I thought that's women's work, right? And so, I didn't see mess, quote unquote, which is this kind of thing. I did see it. I just didn't feel like I had to deal with it.
I think that's so funny. They often say, "Oh, men just don't see mess," right? There's no biological basis for that. Yeah. Okay, men and women can equally see mess, but the people who say men just don't see mess are the same people who say men are visual when it comes to sex, right?
It's a very specific kind of visual. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to say is that I naturally gravitated into those ways as well, and it was before we found Rotsky, we naturally started to do these things. And I got to tell you, as a man, owning the whole task and really feeling that you are from conception, planning, and execution in charge of stuff. And we also have a very modular way of doing things. Like we can shift tasks as we need. We've gotten better at that over time. So knowing that you can do anything that needs to be done in this house, but this is what I'm responsible for at this phase in our marriage. That's incredibly empowering. It's good for your self-esteem. It's good for feeling that you feel like you're really a part of a team and you're doing something really worthwhile. Yeah. And I think a lot of these guys who are talking about how men need their wives to build them up and tell them they respect them and make them feel respected, it's because they're insecure, because they don't feel like they're worthy of respect. Yeah. If you want to feel worthy of respect, take on the load. Shoulder your side of things. Like, step up to the plate. Conception, planning, execution. Own your tasks.
Yeah.
And then you know what? You will feel good about yourself, and your wife will respect you, and you'll see that. And it'll be great, and you won't need to tell her to respect you no matter what you do.
Yeah.
Which is nonsense.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I went off on a bit of a tangent there.
No, that's good. And I think owning your task means also taking the responsibility to learn it.
Yeah.
Like, you took over
Yeah.
laundry about
Yeah,
2
yes.
years ago. And around the same time as we got a new washer dryer.
Yeah.
So I'm not even sure completely how it works. I think I've done a couple of loads, but not a lot. But you took over it completely, but you weren't asking me how to do it. Because you know what we have now? We have Google.
Yes.
And we have YouTube.
Well, and again, we talk so much about being, a true partner, and I was not going to run to mommy to figure out how to make the washing
Yeah,
machine work,
like,
because that's not my way of doing things.
If
right?
you're going to take
I'm going to
on-
figure it out, right?
If you're going to take on cleaning the bathroom, there are some amazing YouTube videos on how to clean the bathroom thoroughly, as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Right? You don't
Yeah.
need to ask someone to teach you. You can figure it out yourself. And that just shows, I am an adult.
Yeah.
And I can do this.
And there's a balance, right? Because it can fall either way, right? Like, so sometimes a person can take over the task, and the other person doesn't like how they're doing it.
Yeah.
They're doing it completely fine. It's just different than they like it.
Right.
And they get upset, and
Yes.
that's not healthy, right? The other side is like they're not doing it well, and it actually needs to be corrected because what they're doing is not safe, or there's reasons why it shouldn't be done that way.
Yeah.
And you need that.
Yeah,
you
like
need to
you're
be able to-
using the same cloth that you clean out the toilet with the cloth, and then you clean the sink
like this-
faucets or something. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever, but yeah. So the problem is that what's been shown, again, this is not man bashing. This is just scientific studies have shown that during times where, like there was one study where in England a big plant shut down and all the men were off work, and they looked at the changes in housework, and they didn't pick up the pace.
Yeah.
And they asked why, and the men said things like, "I just can't do it to her standards. She's so much better at it than me.
She does it so much faster than I do.
She's faster than I can do it." So they basically said, "I'm incompetent at this, so I can't do it," as a way of getting out of housework.
Right.
And that's ridiculous. Like, so
Yeah.
you can't do that. But at the same time, if your spouse who in the past hasn't taken on as much of that labor is now doing it, but they're doing it their own way, like, adjust. If it's good enough, then let them do it the way they want to do it, right? Because it's their task.
Yeah, exactly. And we do need to give each other grace here. We really do. And we need to say, you take a deep breath and go, okay, my husband made a meal. It has all 4 food groups. It did not break the bank. It is not that appetizing, and I could make it so much better. But you know what? It'll do. And that needs to be okay.
Yeah,
You know?
because if you as a team decided that, like in our case, you make the meals every night, right? So if we decided that for whatever reason I had to make a meal one night a week, right? Like, it's not going to be as good as your meals. I'm just not as good at it as you are because you have a lot more practice than I do.
And I truly enjoy it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like, if you complain about the meals that I'm making because they're not the exact kind of way you want it, it's like that's a choice we're making as a couple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And part of that choice is you eating the food I give you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's just part of being a team, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
So, in The Marriage You Want, in chapter 5, we have so many tips on how to correct this imbalance. So we show how it affects couples in such a major way.
Yeah.
We have a lot of charts on how when you do things together, your sex life and your marriage is better, but when there's an unfair distribution of labor, everything is worse. And you can't sustain it over the long term. This is so serious. And I just find it so interesting that these marriage books, which have primarily been written by men, have bemoaned for years women with low libido who don't understand how much their husbands need sex and why don't you give him more sex. But they've never talked about mental load or housework.
Right,
We couldn't find a single best-selling Christian marriage book that said, hey guys, it's not her job to do the housework.
Yeah. Well, no,
You know,
they specifically
They
don't
specifically
believe
say
that,
the
yeah.
opposite.
Yeah.
And if you're and I know this can be difficult because so many of us grew up in these cultures where it is the woman's job to do it, but she enjoys it. She likes decorating for the fall. She likes decorating for Christmas. She makes the home feel homey, and obviously this is meant to be women's work. But just remember that's culture. And yes, maybe she does enjoy all those things, but she doesn't like having all the mental load for everything. You can enjoy decorating at Christmas without wanting all of the mental load, like I'm responsible for your parents' anniversary party, right? Yeah. And so this is where you need to have these conversations, because it really does matter. And think about it this way. If you were to have 3 couples over for dinner, maybe you invite your small group Bible study over for dinner, and there's 8 of you sitting around the table. At the end of that meal, what happens? Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, what would happen is that the women would get up to clear the table and do the dishes, and the men would sit there and keep talking. Yeah. Why? Why? Yeah. Is that actually fair? Just think about it. Is it right that the women should have to always do the cleaning up? Yeah. When the men just get to sit there and just enjoy themselves?
Yeah. And a lot of times it happens not because we actually believe that's women's work and I'm a man and I'm not going to do that. A lot of it's just patterns of behavior so we need to be saying, hey, what's just, what's fair? I should be helping.
Is that what you want to show your kids that marriage is? Yeah. Because girls are not going to put up with that anymore. We're already seeing that. Yeah. So if you want to raise your boys to be good husbands, you need to get them standing up and clearing the table now and doing stuff. Yeah. And if you want to raise your girls to marry a good man, you need to show your girls what kind of man they should be looking for. Yeah. And not make them think it's normal for a girl to have to take on everything, plus work outside the home, because so many women have to now just because of finances.
Yeah, exactly. So be the kind of guy who doesn't fall into easy patterns, but actually is looking at what you're doing, being fair, being just, doing what's right. Yeah. And just fighting against that natural inclination to just kind of fall into those old habits that we tend, that's sort of, which are basically just sexist.
Yeah, because we all can learn to act as a team. We all can learn to do these things. And your marriage will do so much better if you do. Everything does better. You'll feel closer. Your sex life will be better. Everything improves when you act as a team. And I am just so excited that now there will finally be a Christian marriage book, which actually does talk about the biggest problem in Christian marriages. I find it amazing that no book has actually talked about what is the biggest problem. And so let's get this right. We should be reflecting Christ. How have we lived in marriages that are so blatantly unfair? Yeah. What have we been doing? And then we baptize that unfairness and say it comes from God. No, it doesn't. It leads to marital unhappiness. We can do better, people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jesus said, do unto others as you have them do unto you. I would not want to be in a relationship where I was doing more than my fair share of the work, and over our marriage, I knew it was going to get more unfair. Yeah. That's not right. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to do that, so I'm not going to put that on you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So let's get fair. Let's avoid the unfairness threshold and actually do this better and be a team. So you can find out more in The Marriage You Want, which comes out March 11th. You can pre-order it now everywhere you can find books. It really helps us when you pre-order. But tell your pastor about it. We've got premarital curriculum that goes with it. We've got small group curriculum in the study guide. We've got even questions that you can work through as a couple to talk about all of these issues, because we go over housework, we go over sex, we go over spending time together. We go over taking initiative, we go over resolving conflict, we go over how do we actually build emotional connection. We go over all of it. So check out The Marriage You Want, and maybe one day we will all actually have the marriage that we do want and that causes us to flourish. So thank you. We'll see you next week on the Bare Marriage Podcast. Bye-bye. Bye.